Welcome to HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV. And frankly, I'm tired of it. And I'm sure many of you are too. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that. By doing what I do best, interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. Please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. Right then, let's get started. My guest today is Laurence Close. Since the early 80s, Laurence has been at the red-hot centre of the fashion world. He was hair and makeup artist for icons including Britney Spears, Tyra Banks, Annie Lennox, and Alexis Carrington herself, Miss Joan Collins. But while he was backstage at the world's biggest shows, he was carrying a secret, that he was living with HIV. But for 30 years, Laurence's body did something impossible, making him a medical miracle. His story takes in the glamour of the runway, the shadow, as he calls it, of a wolf, and the science that finally allowed him to stop running. Laurence, welcome to HIV The Morning After.
Thank you, Dan. It's lovely to be here.
Well, let's start at the very beginning of your story. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Zambia, in Africa, and then I went to boarding school in Zimbabwe. And it's still illegal to this day in Zambia to be gay. So from the outset, when I left Zambia and I moved to the UK, I didn't come from a position of confidence about being gay. I didn't know other gay people in my home country. You could go to prison for being a homosexual. So I think my very foundation and start as a gay man in a country that was more acceptable was from a position of guilt and shame for my very existence.
What is it like being illegal? I mean, what does that feel like? And not even being, oh, we disapprove of you illegal, but prison illegal.
I mean, I think it's like for lots of people in the closet, you're second guessing yourself all the time. Did I sit down too gay? Do I speak too gay? Did I move too gay? Did I sit too close to that guy? Did I stare too? So it's a constant checking yourself. And you only ever hear gay people talked about in derogatory terms and derision, and it's never anything positive. There's never a role model, and there's never someone that you look to and you think, okay, that's me, that's what I can be, that's who I am. So you really struggle with who you are.
So what are your thoughts then when you hear people say things like, oh, you know what, Laurence, that's just the slings and arrows of growing up. We all go through difficult things like that. We all have our own difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. We do all have our difficulties, but straight people on the whole don't really have their very existence and their sexuality and who they're going to sleep with, who they choose to love, questioned. And they grow up, people have a child and they grow up expecting them to conform to the gender that they were born with. If that isn't the case, you're growing up with a set of rules from day one that aren't for you.
And I've just checked up online. Still now, gay rights in Zambia are severely restricted thanks to colonial era laws. So same-sex relationships are still criminalized and they carry penalties of up to 14 years in prison.
Yep.
And that's in 2026.
Yeah. It's insane, isn't it? You think over here we can get married and have relationships and families and adopt children, and yet there are people in other countries who are going to go to prison just for loving someone.
So you left. and you came to London. What brought you to London?
I first originally came and I went to Scientist Agricultural College. I didn't really know what to do with my life, but we had a farm, and to be honest, I wanted to please my father. So I thought, okay, I'll go to agricultural college. But as soon as I finished that, I met someone. And he was a lot older than me. He was 20 years older than me.
And what year is this?
This is 1983. He's tall and handsome and sophisticated. He's an ambassador. And he was everything that I never thought a gay person could be. I had never seen anybody who was gay who represented what he did. And then he was moving from Zambia to Paris, and I decided to become a hair and makeup artist, and I moved to London to go to hairdressing school. And I used to see him and go over on the weekends to Paris. He was really like a mentor to me because I'd never been to a gay bar. I'd never been to a gay club. I'd never met a group of gay people together. I had never been to the opera. I'd never been to museums. I'd never been to the ballet. So he introduced me to all these amazing things. And for the first time ever, he said to me, gosh, you know, you're so ashamed of who you are. And yet look around you, look at architecture and art and ballet, and all this beauty has been created by gay men. So rather than being ashamed of yourself, you should be proud that you're part of a very talented and unique group of people.
What was London like then? Because 83 is a good year for music. I mean, I love my music, and 83 was such a good year. You got Uptown Girl from Billy Joel, Karma Chameleon, and of course it's the year that Thriller comes out, the Michael Jackson album. So it's like culturally, it's a really interesting time.
It was so fantastic. And you know, there were a whole group of, there used to be a hairdressing academy called Allen International in Hammersmith. And, you know, we were all young and creative and doing each other's hair in different colors and different cuts and different styles and making our own clothes and going to Taboo and to Sacrosanct and to the Hippodrome. And, you know, it was just exciting. And for someone who had grown up so repressed, to suddenly be away from the criticism and the gaze of my peers and in a country where things are illegal, it was amazing just to see all this vibrancy and creativity and loads of other young gay and lesbian men and women.
And so you're dating this guy, this diplomat. Would you say it's fair to say you're dating him?
Yes. I mean, I think, you know, when you have your first experience, I had never slept with a man before, and he was the first person I'd ever gone out with. And that first time you fall in love is like nothing else. You're so naive, you're so all in, or I was at least, so committed.
Oh, darling, I think we all are. I think, yeah. And you know, it's everything, isn't it? And you go, oh, I'm so lucky I found Mr. Right first time.
Yeah. And I really, in my head, I had it all planned. He was separating from his wife, and I was going to do my course as a hairdresser, and then I was going to go into fashion, and I thought, well, you know, it'll be very easy because he's an ambassador, so he's going to be in the capital city in whichever country he gets posted to, so I'll always be able to get a job and blah blah blah.
My God, you really were picking out patterns, weren't you?
I had the whole thing mapped out. To be honest, I had the whole thing mapped out like I was a straight person. I had met the man of my dreams. I was going to be with him. We were going to travel the world together. And then there had been, the press was starting about the gay plague and this new disease. But at that moment, it was because I was only with him and I was totally faithful. I felt that it was a little bit removed from me. And then my best friend in Paris worked for Yves Saint Laurent Beauté, and I went over to see my partner, and he was at work, and I thought, oh, I'll just be nice and I'll clean up the apartment, I'll tidy things up. And I looked under the bed and there was a bag from Yves Saint Laurent Beauté. And I knew he was cheating on me. And I think part of me just thought, you fool.
Really? You blamed yourself?
I was disappointed in me, yeah. And I didn't say anything. I just kept quiet. I stayed the weekend. I came back to London. And it was just in the stop. By now, it was sort of end of 84, beginning of 85. And I'd been going out with him for a little bit over 2 years. And I thought, I need to get tested. And it wasn't so easy to do then. I remember going to Gower Street, and I knew I was positive before I even had the test. I had no symptoms. There was nothing wrong with me. I just knew. You had to wait 2 weeks, but then I had 2 back-to-back photo shoots that weren't in England, so I had to wait 5 weeks.
So by this point, your career had really taken off, had it?
Yeah, things were going really well. I was getting booked for jobs, and I was flying all over the world. And then it was great because catalogue season was in Miami. You went in January, and what used to be Versace bought it and turned it into his mansion. It used to be a boarding house. And come January, all the European hair and makeup artists and hairdressers used to go over there and get an agent in Miami. And then we'd do all the British catalogues, Littlewoods, Grattans, etc., would all come over and they'd book English hair and makeup artists because they already knew us from over here. I was lucky. I think in life you get given your big chance and you either take it and run with it or you mess it up and you try something else. And I was lucky enough to take it and run with it.
And you've taken a test, and your professional life takes you away for 5 weeks. Were you able to lose yourself in your work, or was it just...
It was constantly there because the thing is, you couldn't, at that stage, it had got to the stage, this was 85, 86, end of 85. You couldn't get away with it because it was on the news, it was on the radio, it was on the TV, there were pamphlets in bars, there were posters in the tube, there were posters on the bus, people would talk about it in the pub, people would talk about it at work. So it was everywhere, it was relentless. So there was no escaping it. So you just had to kind of just suck it up and get on with it, try and keep your focus on what you're doing. But then it also filled you with so much paranoia because my big thing was always, am I a danger to other people? And, as a hair and makeup artist, you're trained to have incredibly high standards of cleanliness anyway. But then knowing that you have the possibility of this diagnosis, you start doing things like, it's very common for makeup artists to blend foundation and colors on the back of their hand. And I'm thinking, well, I can't do that. So I've got to make sure I always blend in the palette, and I've got to make sure I always squeeze the foundation. I can't put the foundation on with my fingers anymore. I've got to make sure that I put it directly on a brush, and I use a brush, and I must make sure that the tip of the brush doesn't touch my skin. So, all these things because you just don't know.
This wasn't though, was it? Because people didn't understand how transmission was. It was this is your own paranoia?
It's my own paranoia, and because there was so much misinformation and there was just so much fear around everything. And, people saying, oh, well, anybody who gets tested they're going to keep your information, and then you won't be able to travel. You won't be able to get a work permit. You won't be able to get a mortgage. You won't be able to get insurance. So everything was closing in on you.
So you come back after 5 weeks, I imagine exhausted, not just from work, but from worry.
I remember I went and got my results, and they said, you shouldn't really just go because you should see a counselor first, but we don't have one today. And I was like, well, okay, so that means I can just go. And an amazing sort of detachment and calm descended over me. And I was very sort of matter of fact in my head. I was like, okay, I'm HIV positive now. There wasn't even the distinction so much between HIV positive and AIDS. It was just, everybody just called it AIDS. So you had AIDS. And then I went home, and I thought I was 25, and I wasn't out to my parents, and I was like, well, I can't come out to my parents and then 3 months later I die of AIDS. And I can't die of AIDS and then my parents find out I'm gay because of that. And I just kept thinking of how I can't do this to them. I can't bring them all this shame. So my thinking was, I have to find the right time to commit suicide. And do I do it now, immediately, or do I wait and see how I am? Do I carry on trying to have a bit of a life because maybe I've got 2 years? So and then if things start to change immediately, do they change before anybody can see that something's wrong with me, or it looks physically like my health is changing? I'll arrange to have an overdose, but try and make it look like an accidental overdose, because in the small farming community where my parents live, it's going to be so much easier for them and so much less stigma for them to be able to turn around and say, our son died of an accidental drug overdose, than it is for them to turn around and say, our son died of AIDS.
So far away from home in London with this news, in a way, you're still that boy back in Zambia.
Yeah, and still not wanting to disappoint my parents, and not to be a letdown, and not to bring shame to them because of who and what I am.
And it sounds like this wasn't a wailing and gnashing you were doing in your flat. It sounds, this sense of you being detached sounds like it was a very sensible conversation with yourself.
It was almost, I can only describe, I did the whole, me finding out, I was always, I did crash later, but much later. It was almost as though I went home and I was trying to decide when would be the best time to swap the summer tires for winter tires, because I didn't want to do it too early, and I didn't want to do it too late. And I didn't involve drama and crying, and it was just, I was just very icy cold, and just, okay, now I've got to work out, how do I do this? And that was my focus.
And how much of this had you witnessed in your professional life? Had you seen other people getting ill and disappearing?
I'd seen awful things happen to a friend. I got a lovely friend from South Africa, and he came out to his parents. They didn't know he was gay. He came out to them, told he's gay, told them that he had HIV. And actually, when he told them, he actually had full-blown AIDS. And his father's reaction was to him, I wish you'd told me you had cancer, because then I could feel sorry for you.
Whoa.
And, you hear things like that and you think, oh God, is that the kind of reaction I will get? And then there were so many people in my industry were dying, beautiful, like Stevie Hughes and Dan Carey and Luba Steubenville and Yali Baka, all these beautiful, talented hair and makeup artists and photographers, and it was every week. And the fashion industry was decimated, and you were always hearing about another person who had become ill, and then there were all often speculation. If somebody lost weight or was a bit thin, or if you didn't hear from them for a while, and it was just the most horrible time.
And now it's your turn.
Yeah. And I wrote in that week I had off, I wrote a letter to, that's how long ago, I wrote a letter to my partner, or my supposed partner in Paris. And I just said to him, listen, I've had the test and I came back with a positive result. I suggest that you have a test as well. And that's all I did. And then the rest I just wrote like a normal letter, but I included that. And then he called me and he went for the test, and he said, would you come over when I get my results? And I said, yes, of course I will. So I went over to Paris. He got his results and they were positive. And he just fell apart, completely fell apart. And he blamed me. He kept saying to me, who have you been sleeping with? Who have you been sleeping with? And I said to him, I only ever slept with you. There is nobody else. And he just wouldn't believe me. And I never got angry. I never blamed him. I never turned to him and said, oh, you did this to me. Because from the way I looked at it, I thought, we're both going to die. It doesn't do any good to blame anybody. So yes, and then as I was leaving on that weekend, he said, I don't think we should see each other anymore.
This is after 2 years together?
Yes. Yeah, 3 years. And I was just empty. I just thought, you know what, I just got too much to deal with. I know I'm not going to be able to lean on you. I've just got to face this on my own. After I'd got my diagnosis, I was then transferred, or my treatment went to the Jeffreys wing at St. Mary's in Paddington. And you'd sit in the waiting room there, and it would be, nobody really ever spoke. There was always a little nod and a quiet acknowledgement, because we all knew why we were there, but there was still that sort of silence and that it wasn't a bright, chatty, bubbly place at all in those early days. And then very early on, I came in, and this one girl, Eunice, I think I mentioned her too, she said to me, oh, I love your coat. And I started laughing, and I said to her, well, I've got to try and keep the boys interested somehow. And we started laughing, and we started talking And she was from Nigeria, and she was a lesbian, and she had contracted HIV from being raped. And I remember after speaking with her, and she was so lovely and she was so comforting to me. I went home and I thought, my God, you are educated, middle-class, white male. How many other unearned advantages do you expect life to throw at you? Just get on with it. You've got everything in front of you. Here and now, today, you're okay. So live, or else you're going to spend your time dying.
You go back to work and your work just takes off. You get agents and you're traveling all over the world. While your career is taking off, do you think this darting about everywhere, doing everything, was a way to never have to stand still and look people in the eye and share your status, that you could just keep on the move and never stay in one place too long to be asked any questions?
It was a combination of things. It was in the very, very early stages. I was still in London, and I was just trying to sort of recover from no longer having a partner, having the wind knocked out of me by my diagnosis, deciding whether I was going to kill myself now or later on. And then you'd go out, you'd meet someone, or I did, and you wouldn't sleep with them, and you wouldn't even really kiss them. You'd be a little bit distant from them. Then you'd go out a few more times and you still wouldn't sleep with them. And, by the end, they were telling you that they loved you and that you were the best person they ever met, and you're so this and you're so that. And so you'd sort of think, okay, well, I think I can tell you. And I made sure never to tell people in a situation where they felt they couldn't leave. Because I sort of thought, well, if I tell you in my apartment and you want to get up and go, it looks super obvious. Whereas if we're sitting in a park, in Hyde Park on the lawn, and we had no plans afterwards, it's just a very natural thing to say, oh, well, thank you for telling me. And go, I never wanted to someone to feel pressurized to act in one way or the other. But you would have someone today who was telling you that they adored you and how amazing you were, and then you would tell them, and you'd never hear from them again. And the hardest thing with that was that you didn't blame them, because you thought, well, what would I do with all this hysteria if I was HIV negative and somebody who I'd never slept with, who I'd known only 6 weeks, told me that they, possibly were going to die of this terrible disease. Of course, I totally understood. The sexual part of a relationship should bring you closer together and bond you and feel closer as a unit. And yet I used to feel that even if even after I'd told someone, if they still wanted to sleep with you or sleep with me, I had this awful, it's a terrible thing to feel grateful because somebody took a chance on sleeping with you. And then on the other hand, you feel, or I felt, even with protection and everything that we're doing, I still felt that I was taking a revolver and spinning the barrel and pointing it at their head and going click. And that's such a hard thing to then try and base a relationship around that.
So despite your incredibly busy flashbulb life around the world, insanely busy life, were you lonely?
Oh God, yes. after those, where I'd had several rejections and, after telling somebody there was radio silence, you then had the panic of, okay, well now, are they going to tell someone? Do they know someone in the fashion industry who's going to tell a client who's then not going to work with me? Or is my agent going to drop me? So you had that paranoia of that. And then I turned into what I wanted. I wanted to be loved, and I wanted to connect with someone, and I wanted to feel safe. But I felt toxic, and I didn't feel that I could have that. And so what I substituted for was trying to turn myself into an object of desire. So I was desired. I wanted to be ripped and tanned and great haircut and beautiful clothes and funny and humorous, and so that people would want me. But then I wouldn't let them come close, because I would be, this is all I can get, because when I tell you, I'm going to lose you. And there's only so many times I can do that. And you have, I remember once I was just I managed to have a partner, and we were having an argument. Just something inconsequential, nothing terribly. But in the middle of the argument, he just stopped and he went, well, does it really matter? You're going to be dead soon.
Whoa.
And, you would have small little things like that just blow you out the water. And so you desperately want someone to love you and to look past everything.
Although, of course, the one thing you can't run away from is your own body. And you describe yourself as feeling toxic.
Yeah, to feel dangerous to others is such a mindfuck. It really is, because it affects everything. You so long for this connection, and you feel unworthy. I mean, I had some terrible relationships with people and I know, looking back, I chose them because, so a typical scenario, and this would be a typical person for me to date, they would be incredibly fucked up. And I would look at them and think, but if I date you, I'm not shortchanging you. It's not like you're an amazing, fantastic person who is going to be shortchanged by dating someone like me. So I think, and I think I can help you. I think I can make your life better. I think I can do something for you that justifies me being HIV positive. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. So you, in a way, you felt you didn't deserve happiness, but what you could have is gratitude.
I got a bit of a reputation for being this very icy person, in that I looked good on the outside, but I wouldn't let you come close to me. So, I think a lot of people thought I was a tease because of that. And actually, it was far from the truth. That isn't really who I was at all.
But that must have been exhausting, living such a performative life, because at the same time, you are, as you have described it, you have the wolf chasing you. You have no idea at what point your immune system is going to collapse. And you, from what you're telling me, you barely have a support system. So not only do you have no one to snuggle up with and watch the Golden Girls, you also have no world really that is offering you all the support you need.
And there were all these services that I could have accessed, but I was so scared of being found out. What if I go there and there's somebody who I've done a photo shoot with, And the stupid thing was, the stupid thing is, it didn't occur in my head, well, yeah, if there's somebody there, they're in the same boat as you, so it'll be fine. But you know that when you're on that running and scared and ashamed and trying to hide, I don't think you always think the most clearly. It's funny, I was so calm and clear about my suicide and how I would end things and how I would save my family. But when it came to sort of looking after myself and protecting myself, I wasn't I wasn't there for me. I mean, I think if I could show up for my younger self now and look at my younger self and say something to myself, I would have said, you know, take the help and get someone to talk to. You don't have to just try and deal with this by yourself.
In your pre-interview notes, you talked about going to St. Mary's for appointments and seeing people fade. Well, you must be looking at this thing and thinking, this is my future, and when is that going to be me sitting in that chair?
You would go and you would see people, and then you'd see them the next time, and then they would not be there anymore. And you knew what had happened, and you could see the pregnant. That was so frightening. It just made you petrified. But every time I went, nothing was happening. And I remember the very first time when they did my bloods and they were doing this viral load and the CD4 count and everything. And I think in the early years, I don't think that the viral load test they did was as sensitive as it is nowadays. So they would say to me, well, we can't actually find any virus in your system. And your CD4 count is really high, even for a person without any illness, and so you're in really strong, fit, healthy condition. And then they would go, okay, well, we'll see you in 3 months. And then I said to them, you know what? I travel so much. I'm always missing appointments. Can I just come every 6 months? And then they would like, okay, but if you get any symptoms, if you start feeling, come immediately. So then I went every 6 months, and I'd go, and they'd go, yeah, there's still nothing wrong. You're still going to find your viral load, and your CD4 count is still really, really high. And then I was like, well, can I come once a year? And they weren't that happy about that. But, my career is taking off even more. So they were like, well, okay. So the one time I went in and they said, we're going to do another test on you because there is a chance it does happen. You might have got a false positive. So they did a test again on me, and they went, no, it is right. You are HIV positive, but nothing progressed.
At this time, were you thinking, oh, this is what it's like for everyone? Or did there come a point where you started to think, my body isn't behaving like other people's bodies?
I didn't know one, because by this stage, I had lost a lot of friends. And I was just like, well, why doesn't anything happen to me? And there is a certain amount of guilt that goes along with that, in that, everybody else is getting sick and dying, and I'm still here. And it starts off, it's like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, 36 years, and still things aren't changing. And I was very grateful. But I ended up with a life that I never imagined for a second that I'd ever be able to have. I didn't think I would be or live to be an old man. It wasn't it wasn't even something that I thought about. And I didn't sort of sit there and think, oh, poor me, I'm never going to be an old man, I'm going to die. I just thought, well, this is how my life is. I'm going to die early, but I've got this amazing career. I'm traveling around the world. Actually, I've seen and done more than most people ever get to do. So I'm lucky. I'm having a great life.
But of course, when you're living that great life, you're not living it with the hindsight that you are now. That with you can look back on your life now and go, "That was great. I wasn't ill." But every single day you woke up, you didn't know if you were going to find a purple lesion somewhere on your
absolutely.
body, and that happened for decades, and that must be exhausting.
It is, and it's the one terrible relationship that I ended up having. The person I ended up in the relationship with absolutely honed in and tapped into all my insecurities. And one of his ways of making me susceptible to him was he told me that he had chronic lymphatic leukemia and that he was dying. And he wanted me to move to his house in the south of France. And I thought that I was going to go there and I was going to look after him, and he was going to die, and then I would come back to England. And we almost bonded over the fact that I was HIV positive, and that, I understood, the thoughts around your own death and how it must be and everything. And then when I got to the south of France, it was just a typical narcissistic trap of isolating me, cutting me off from all my friends. And then I found out that he didn't have leukemia at all. It was all a lie. And when you're in such an abusive relationship, I didn't want to tell people what was happening to me because I was ashamed that I'd gotten into this situation. I didn't know how to get out of it. I didn't know, and because I also ride and train horses, so it was so easy to go to the doctor and go, oh, I fell off a horse, because it fitted with what I did, so I could always logically explain the violent side of things away. And then I came back to London to do a job, and the client who picked me up at the airport took one look at me and she went, "What is going on?" She didn't tell me what to do. She just put her hand on my shoulder and she just said, "If you don't leave this man, you know that one day he's going to kill you." They managed to get me a place in a domestic abuse refuge called Norda House, but I had to go back to France first because he still had my dog. And I knew if I just didn't return, then he would do something awful. And so I went back, and every day I used to take the dog for a walk, and then I made some excuse to send him back to England to a friend of mine. And then when my partner there went away on business, I took hand luggage, and the French police took me to the airport, and then I just blocked him on everything, and I've never spoken to the man since.
How do you feel your journey with HIV intersects with you finding yourself in a dangerously abusive relationship? Are they connected?
Yes, if he hadn't have been able to have that in to me about him, because he didn't have chronic lymphatic leukemia, that was a lie. That wasn't true. So he had told me he had chronic lymphatic leukemia because he knew that I would be sympathetic towards him, and that would be a way to get me to do what he wanted. And, the whole thing with those people like that is that they want to get you away from your friends. They want to isolate you. And then the person who they really are comes out. Because when we were together in England, he was charming and everything that I thought I possibly would ever want to have in a relationship. But it's not the real person. It's not who they are. And after I had managed to get away from him, I found other people that he'd done the same thing to, and the same story, telling them that he had leukemia and he only had 5 years to live. And I look back and I think, how did I fall for that? And then I see, yeah, of course, because it fell straight into your thing of not being worthy, and then, oh, here's somebody who I can help, who I can look after, I can do something. I'm not shortchanging them because of me being HIV positive. I'm going to take care of them and look after them as they're dying. So it all tied into that so neatly. So I was a perfect victim.
So your language and your language use is consistent and strong. You talk about toxicity. You talk about when you have sex with people, the potential of it being a loaded gun. You talk about the wolf chasing you. When did you start to feel these words slipping away? When did they start to become less relevant to you?
I remember in 2016, because the first time I had a result where my viral load was up a tiny bit from undetectable, not a lot, just a tiny bit. And
so hang on, your body had been pretty stable up to this point without meds.
Yes, I never took any meds. I only started taking medication in 2016.
So this is 3.5 decades. Your body has been fine.
It's been absolutely fine. They'd taken my blood and they had been using it for research, and I'd done loads of questionnaires about lifestyle and partners and ethnicity and family background and just loads of things. And there is a genetic mutation on one of the genes that they think comes from the times when people had the plague and possibly smallpox. And in simple terms, when you get the HIV, the virus enters your system. That virus then attaches itself onto one of your normal healthy cells. It invades that cell, it replicates, that explodes, releases lots more that go on to attack other cells, and the process repeats itself again and again. If you have this CCR5 delta 32 gene mutation, it interferes with the attachment of the virus to your cell, so it can't get into your cell. And if you have inherited, if you're heterozygous, so you've inherited a gene mutation from your mother and from your father, then you're pretty impervious to HIV. If you inherit one, then you have a much, much, much slower progression of the disease. It takes much, much longer because the virus still can't get into your cells as easily. But in 2016, when I've heard U equals U, and the science was now that if you were on medication and your viral load was undetectable, you couldn't pass it on to someone else. That changed my whole thinking of myself. For the first time ever, I wasn't the loaded gun anymore. I wasn't dangerous. I could sleep with someone unprotected and I wasn't going to infect them.
How did that feel?
It's like the biggest weight being lifted off your shoulder to no longer, that self-hatred that you have. It's not hatred, because hatred always seems like that's a bit of anger, but that feeling about yourself as something poisonous is gone.
Because a huge amount of your story, hearing you talk about your parents in Zimbabwe, hearing you talk about colleagues, hearing you talk about lovers, people you're meeting up with, people who you're dating, the consistency throughout almost all of your story is you're constantly worried about other people, and you don't really give much time to be worried about yourself or to indeed put yourself first.
Right from the beginning, it's like, I'm HIV positive, I'm going to die. And I was a very matter of fact, I can't change that, that is just how it is. And then I thought, but I can not infect someone else, because I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. So that has always been in the forefront of my mind, that I didn't want to infect someone else.
And so you've been fundamentally affected by U equals U in a wonderfully positive way. Where has that brought you now? Where are you now in your life?
Oh, when I left Norderhouse Domestic Abuse Refuge, I met a Swedish man, and for 2 years we just chatted. I had no intention of having a relationship. I had lost everything. I was starting again from scratch. I was 59 years old, and I just thought, oh, listen, you don't own a house, you've got no money, you can still go back to being a hair and makeup artist and work, but nobody's going to saddle their wagon to your horse. But you'll always get laid. There's Grindr. Don't worry about it. Just get on working and get on with your life. And I chatted to Urian for 2 years without ever seeing a photo of him. It wasn't going to be a sexual thing. It wasn't. He was just this lovely man. He was in Sweden. I was in London. I didn't have to meet him. He worked in mental health, so he was able to help me with some of my issues I was having around nightmares about the violent abuse I suffered from my ex and the panic attacks and stuff. So he was just lovely. And then he was going through a divorce, and he had 4 children and everything. So we were just friends. And then it was my birthday, and he said, oh, I'd love to come to London and see you. And that was in end of 2020. And he came to see me, and I'd said to him, listen, I have a tiny little flat. You're welcome to stay. I said, but I just have to tell you now, if you think you're coming over to start a relationship and sleep with me, you will be bitterly disappointed, because this is not what this is. And he was amazing. He never once tried to cross a boundary, and he was respectful, and we just laughed and we had fun. And I did something that I think we should all do, but this is the first time I've probably ever done it. I fell in love with somebody because of how they treated me, not because of their social status or the job they had or what they looked like. And I've never had such a good relationship, and we've been married 3 years now, and I moved to Sweden. And if anybody had have told me all those things that you wanted, like a stable relationship and someone you love and to belong and to feel safe and to no longer have your shame, if somebody told me that's all going to happen after you're 60, I wouldn't have believed them.
We're coming towards the final portion of the show, and this is where we dedicate a moment to those who didn't get to see the progress that we see today. Who would you like us to remember, and why?
Oh, I think, I mean, there's so many, but I think Eunice, whose last name I never knew, because she made me get up and decide to keep living and keep going.
Laurence, if you had to write a postcard to the world, what would it say?
First of all, I would say educate yourselves, because if you're just speaking from a point of regarbled things you've heard in the pub and whatever, chances are you won't have the correct information. Be kind and change the language that you use, especially in apps and everything. If what you mean is, I'd like to date someone who's HIV negative, write that. Don't write, I need someone who's clean, because that's not what you're saying. You're saying people who are HIV positive are dirty.
Yeah, we need to stop that shit.
Yeah. It's not the person who is HIV positive and tells you their status that is the danger to you. It's that person you think is so gorgeous and you fancy and you've had a few too many drinks with and you want to go home with, who doesn't know their status. That's where the danger lies.
Why did you agree to do this podcast? Because I understand from our conversation that this is your public outing, in a way, sharing your status. Why have you decided to do it?
I just realized I'm not ashamed anymore. I don't feel toxic anymore. And if in some small way I can make somebody who is in or was in my position feel a bit better about themselves, to remove the stigma, to remove that, and you know, the assumption that if you're HIV positive, somehow you've been promiscuous or you deserved it, or to just, it's 2026, that needs to stop, it needs to go. It's just another disease.
And now finally, to absolutely ram the point home, what does U equals U mean?
U equals, if you have an undetectable viral load and you're on retroviral medications, you cannot transmit HIV to another person, so that you are safe to have sex with that person.
Absolutely. Laurence Close, thank you so much for guesting with me here on HIV The Morning After.
Thanks, Dan. It's been lovely.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Pauline Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Join me next time for another important conversation on HIV The Morning After. I've been Dan Hall.